This is our day to shine. But I got to tell you something. Shining really hurts sometimes. But Paul invites the people of Philippi to do that. He says that you can shine like stars in the midst of a warped and crooked generation. Now, that kind of sounds like us versus them language, but it's not. That language actually is used to describe not the pagan Gentiles, but the people of God in the Old Testament. And what I want to talk about today is real messy. It's very messy in my own life, but it's relationships and relational pain and the question of, is it worth it? I think maybe the greatest risk in life that we take when we become a friend or we get married or we have children or we enter into any kind of a vulnerable relationship, is it worth the pain that it's going to cause my heart? And there is a way of thinking. We live in a very therapeutic culture, so often it can be protect yourself, keep safe, have boundaries. There's a certain kind of wisdom to that. I get it, but there's another way of thinking, and it's a messier way. And we find God on the messier way. God's life is surprisingly messy. And Paul is writing now to the church of Philippi about a good friend, a spiritual friend of his, and things are quite messy here. This is not a little passage of calm. There's a lot going on under the surface. Paul says, in the meantime, I consider it necessary to send Epaphroditus to you, my brother, my fellow worker, my fellow soldier, and your envoy commissioned by you to take care of my needs. I must do this because he's very homesick for all of you and greatly distressed. Now, Paul is sending this man, Epaphroditus, back to the Philippians. Most likely, Jerry Hawthorne says in his commentary, they had commissioned him. Part of their gift to Paul, including financial gifts, was Epaphroditus to be his assistant, someone who would serve him. And now Paul is saying, probably to their disappointment, it's necessary for him to stop that arrangement for Epaphroditus to go back. And he knows that they're likely going to be quite disappointed in Epaphroditus and wondering what's the matter with you and be critical of him. So this is a very sensitive passage. He was very homesick for all of you, greatly distressed because you heard he was sick. Indeed, he was sick. He nearly died. But God took pity on him. And not only on him, but on me as well, so that I might not have to suffer one grief after another. Paul is someone who knows grief and pain. I am sending him, therefore, sooner than I expected. Things didn't work out the way that we all thought it would. In order that, when you see him again, you may be glad, and I may be relieved of anxiety. Paul's having to be anxious about this whole situation, relationships, Epaphroditus, the people back at Philippi. So he instructs him, welcome him then as a brother in the Lord with great gladness. Hold people like him in high esteem, for he nearly died for the cause of Christ by risking his life to give me the help that you yourselves were not able to give. This passage is not a picture of serenity and Zen calmness in the life of Epaphroditus or of Paul or the people back at Philippi. He uses a bunch of language that has to do with anxiety and great distress and homesickness that you would not find back in Paul's day, for example, in the writings of a good Stoic. Stoics were something like the therapeutic culture in our day. The great goal in Stoic philosophy, at least one of them would have been to escape the great problem of suffering, which emerges from our desire, and to do that by understanding, I got to focus on what can I control. The big distinction in that thinking was what I cannot control, that's the external world, what happens to me. What I can control, my own attitude. So by reason, I will transcend suffering and become calm and self-sufficient by letting go of anything that might be disturbing. For Paul and for Jesus, the way of God is quite different. It is not suffering relieved by reason. It is suffering offered up in love. Suffering will actually be redeemed because God himself suffers along with us. The word compassion Passion in the old days meant primarily the passion of Jesus and suffering. When I come alongside someone and am willing to love them and willing to enter into suffering for them, willing for my heart to be vulnerable, I become part of a project that is bigger than me, that God himself is a part of. And Paul writes here that that's part of what he sees in Epaphroditus. So even though circumstances aren't turning out in the way that people apparently initially thought they would or hoped they would, and that might be tempted to be kind of critical about Epaphroditus. What's the matter with you? Why couldn't you be stronger? He was sick. Jerry points out that Paul doesn't go into detail about Epaphroditus' sickness. Paul, even though there were times that God used him for healing and he was this amazing apostle, he apparently was not able to snap his finger and relieve Epaphroditus of whatever this problem was. And Jerry writes, it's quite tender because of Jerry's own anxieties in his life and his work, how maybe it was an emotional instability in Epaphroditus that caused a kind of anxiety that meant that he would have to go home. But Paul said, no, I want you to know what I see in him. Now, as I look at people today who are suffering, or maybe who I love, who I feel like are causing me suffering, and I'm tempted to see only my disappointment or feel only my pain, Paul says, no, when I look at Epaphroditus, I see my coworker, we work together, I see a fellow soldier. Everybody that you know is fighting a battle that nobody else can see. My fellow soldier, and then my brother. He's family to me. And so when I send him back to you, I want you to do this. I want you to welcome him with open arms, because we're creating this strange kind of community, the fellowship of the withered hand, where we meet together in the place of our vulnerability and our suffering and our anxiety and our homesickness and our distress, and we have open hearts for one another. We're involved in the heart of God and a project of God in a unique way, and the risk will never be done. It's fascinating. Jerry goes on to say in here that Epaphroditus staked his life, and he points out that the word that Paul uses here is an expression that Paul most likely coined himself, and it's taken from the gambling world, to throw down a stake, to make a venture, people who risk their lives. In coining this gambling term, he writes, Paul may have been influenced by Epaphroditus' name. Aphrodite, or Venus, was the goddess of gamblers, and whenever a Greek made the highest cast, he cried out, Epaphroditus, a favorite of Aphrodite, hoping by this invocation to be blessed with the gambler's luck in the throw of the dice. Paul says Epaphroditus gambled with his life, but he won because God was there. And so what I'm talking about now is the risk of suffering love, as opposed to the self-protection and the distance that makes my own emotionally pleasant life my ultimate priority. No, this is the fellowship of the withered hand, and we follow the way of the cross. There is a famous wager. You may have heard of Pascal, fascinating book about him by James Conner, Blaise Pascal, who invented the modern world, at least a good chunk of it. He lived only 39 years, 17th century, was perpetually sick. From childhood on, he was in pain every day, but along the way, he invented one of the first calculating machines, the first public transportation system, probability theory, decision theory, much of the mathematics of risk management, and proved the existence of the vacuum. All of which set the stage for quantum mechanics, the insurance industry, management science, racing forums, the computer, Powerball lotteries, Las Vegas, the vacuum pump, the concept of outer space, the jet engine. You can't walk 10 feet into the 21st century without running into something that Pascal's 39 years didn't affect in one way or another. Most powerfully in his life, Pascal met God. Buried in depression, one evening, November 23rd, 1654, he had a direct encounter with God that changed him. And he wrote and pinned this note inside of his jacket, words about that meeting with God that nobody would have ever known until after he had died. He wrote famously about what's sometimes called Pascal's wager. And it's often misunderstood in our day. Connor writes about it in his book. But the idea is this. You are launched. Sometimes people think the question of whether or not God exists and whether or not I'll follow him is abstract, theoretical. I don't have to take a position. Pascal says, no. You got to live. You got to build your life on something. You're already launched. None of us is in a position where we don't have to commit our life to some foundation or another. We're that kind of a creature. So Pascal said, we basically have a few choices. I can trust God or I cannot trust God. I can make myself, my ego, my agenda, my top priority. If I trust God and God exists, then what lies before me is eternal flourishing. Heaven is the Bible's language for this. On the other hand, if I don't trust God, but God exists, then I miss eternal flourishing. And the old biblical language for this is heaven and hell. Dallas Willard used to say, hell is just the best God can do for some people, so I won't spend much time with that one. And the other two possibilities are I can trust God and there is no God, in which case I will rot in the grave. Or I cannot trust God and there is no God, in which case I will rot in the grave. But Pascal said, if you follow Jesus and it turns out that there is no God, what will you have missed? You will have missed vainglory and the feverish, obsessive pursuit over safety and wealth and things that cannot last. And you haven't really lost anything anyway. Paul writes to the church at Philippi and says, now Epaphroditus risked his life. He bet the farm on suffering love and self-giving sacrifice. And that's the invitation for you and me today. That's what it is to shine. If your heart's breaking, if you're in relational pain, if there is somebody in your world and it's a friend or it's a parent or it's a child and they've gone in a direction that is really hurtful for you and you're not even sure what to do. You don't have to be sure of what to do. We just bring that together. We bring that to each other. We're in this community. I was talking with somebody just a couple of days ago who talked about, if the church can be a place where people that have addictions, where people that are anxious, where people that are depressed, where people that have failed, where people that have made huge problems, where people that have sinned and keep sinning in ways that are really, really disturbing, where people who wrestle with shame, if we could just come, stand at the feet of Jesus at the foot of the cross, me too, me too, me too, me too. That's the fellowship of the withered hand. And then we bet the farm on suffering love and we open our hearts up to other people. That's what it is to shine. This is our day.
Hey, I'm Tim, part of the team here at Become New. Thanks so much for tuning in. If there was a quote from the teaching today that really jumped out to your heart and mind, we would love to have you put it in the comments so that we can reflect on it together. For me, it's kind of a glancing thought, but the quote from Dallas Willard that he referenced, that hell is just the best God can do for some people. I'm going to be thinking about that one for a while. So what stood out to you? Also, as I was listening, I felt like the Holy Spirit was bringing to mind the difficulties in my own life. Some difficulties I feel like He's entrusted me with through no choice of my own, but then other difficulties that I feel like I've brought upon myself or the people I love through my own foolishness and pride. And no matter what those difficulties are, maybe there's difficulties you're facing, I was just reminded and encouraged that I can shine in the midst of those difficult circumstances. So if you had a takeaway today, you can drop the quote in there. You could also tell us what your takeaway was so that we can cheer you on and be praying for you. There is a group of us who meet together every weekday to pray for viewers just like yourself. So if you've got a prayer request, you can send it to us. All our contact info is in the show notes. Thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.